Michael, the interaction between the, if you like, probabilistic comments of scientists about what is happening and the uncertainty around what they're saying is with the desire for politicians to make definite statements, we need to do this because the science leads it, has put science in a difficult position at the moment, because the whole world is being told to behave in a particular way in response to the coronavirus crisis. And we're told all the time that we have to do this because the science is telling us that this is the answer, But of course, the science is saying not that this is the answer, but this is a probable way forward. How do you see all that acting out?
Well, let me just spend a few seconds. I've been studying corona as a data scientist. My area of speciality is time trajectories of anything since for 150 days already, basically working, 18 hours a day. And basically focusing on the data. I'm going to leave aside economics, politics, and media, and just simply talk about the science here. And I must say that this is the first time I've actually ever done real-time science, i.e. putting out 30 reports in as many days, full of typos, errors, backtracking, and everything. One thing that has struck me once the virus moved from its China-Korea phase to the rest of the world at the beginning of March is how totally inadequate science structure is for real-time science. People are insisting on refereed reports. No one wants to share anything. The scientists are more panicked and scared of reality than anybody else. The august organizations like Lindau, the Royal Society, the National Academy of Science have been totally silent. I am really disappointed. This has got nothing to do with the politics. As a group, scientists have failed the younger generation. Deciding what to do in this situation is really, really difficult. We cannot rely on one or two voices. There should have been a committee formed either by the Nobel Foundation, by Lindau, by the Royal Society, the National Academy in the middle of February when this was coming down the road, and we should have discussed this. Instead, we let economics and politics dedicate the science. And for me, the worst opposition I got was from very, very prominent scientists who were so scared that the non-scientists would break quarantine and infect them. There was total panic. And the fact is that almost all the science we were hearing, for example, from organizations like the World Health Organization, was wrong. We had Facebook censoring the World Health Organization, contrary views. This has been a disgraceful situation for science, and I have nothing to do. We should have been talking with each other. Reports were released openly, shared by email, and all I got back was abuse. And you're going to see that everything I said in that first 6 weeks was actually true, and for political reasons, we as scientists let our views be corrupted. The data had very clear things to say. Nobody said to me, let me check your numbers. They all just said, stop talking like that.
So, Michael, there's a number of fascinating aspects of what you are saying, and obviously extraordinarily important ones. The first thing is that, for those who don't know, you have been quite outspoken in your criticism of the lockdown policies, and in, if you like, I suppose, the general acceptance of the severity of the pandemic, if that's not too simplistic a paraphrase. One of the points you made when you were just talking was that there have been individual scientists who have been rather leading the debate. And that is a problem, because it seems to me that science is a global effort of a huge community of people swapping a diversity of views. But when it comes to something like this, individuals are being, if you like, recruited by governments to make policy. And so they come very much to the fore. And that's always going to be the case. So it's awfully difficult to see how a kind of global community debate can happen in the midst of people needing to make decisions. And what you suggest of committees is lovely, but there is always that pull pressure from policymakers who say we need to know the answers. So how do you really get around that? How would it have worked in your mind?
So I think if we had initially just a few scientists talking to each other on Zoom, not about the opinions, but about the data. What is the population infection ratio? What is the severity? Does the thing grow exponentially? There are some very, very simple questions. And it's true that the epidemiologists were always saying that we're not epidemiologists, but the fact is that viral cases and deaths follow a time trajectory. And I think physicists and theoretical chemists who understand trajectories are way better qualified. The epidemiologists made their normal error. Epidemiologists they see their job not as getting things correct, but preventing an epidemic. So therefore, if they say it's 100 times worse than it's going to be, it's okay. Their mistake was that we listened to them. They said the same thing for Ebola. They said the same thing for bird flu. No one shut down for them. We should never have listened to the epidemiologists. They have caused hundreds of billions of dollars worth of suffering and damage, mainly on the younger generation. This is going to be a tragedy it's going to make 9/11 look like a baby story. This is much, much worse. I am not against lockdown. I am against stupid lockdown without considering the full picture, i.e. not just combating a virus that is exactly as dangerous as flu, but also avoiding the economic damage that every country has caused itself except Sweden. We have really, really failed as a group. There have been smart people in Sweden, and that's about it. Germany is getting reinfected because they cut down too strongly. The level of stupidity that's been going on here has been amazing, and it just required a little bit of discussion of smart people. I'm not saying I'm right, but I would like people to control me on the details. Why is it not exponential? I can show you. Why is the case infection ratio this, not that? There is data for this. In other words, everything is data-driven, but people have chosen not to look at the data. Even in many places, the politics has infected the scientists. Certainly in the USA, the politics has infected the scientists.
Right, thank you. Now I'd like to bring. I want to bring everybody in on this, and it's difficult to do it online in a fair way because you can't see who's the most eagerly trying to get into the conversation. You mentioned the younger generation. I very much want to come to Alice in a second, but first I'd just like to get Saul. I know you think a lot about how people should have sensible scientific conversations. So do you see a way that what Michael is describing could work?
No, my feeling is that Michael's main concern is one that I see happening all over the place in when scientists are feeling under attack by the democratic system not being able to talk to them. And then there's a tendency to circle the wagons and hide all the conversations that need to happen. And it ends up hurting us as well because it hides the conversations from ourselves. And so I think that Michael's, as far as I can tell, your main point, Michael, is well taken. That when we start getting too worried and too scared about how we will be heard by the politicians, and then there's a tendency to take some particular frozen moment of science, and science never works well when you freeze the moments. And then everybody feels that they have to stick to that line until somebody hears it in the political world. And of course, that I don't think has been very effective for climate change, for any of the approaches. And I think that we should be trying a different approach. We should be working harder at, first of all, sharing with the public how science works. How is it that we actually work through problems, and being willing to put up with a little bit more give and take, being visible from the scientists to the public. And as long as they understand that that's actually the process, that's the way it really works, and that we actually often make advances that way, and that it's not that they then give up on looking for science to help them. It's that they're more educated consumers of how to take in that slightly rougher style of what science really looks like when people are working through problems together. I don't know if I'm capturing a little bit what you're saying, Michael, as well.
Can I just reply to that? I totally agree with what Saul has said, but I think the problem is not just science and public, it's science to other scientists. You know, nobody ever said, you're saying this, can I check your numbers? This is all something which any intelligent person could do themselves in a few days. Every science needs problems to be worked over. This is not, you know, quantum mechanics. Maybe it is quantum mechanics, but it's basically not that difficult. They're simple logical assumptions. And, you know, in the end, they got discussed, but they got discussed so slowly and so late. Remember, unlike most of science, we have everything has a very limited shelf life. To predict that Italy is over today is very easy. To predict what's going to happen in Italy on the beginning of March was very difficult. And it would have helped Italy to know that they were going to have no more than 500 per million deaths rather than what they were expecting. So I honestly do believe that even just two scientists talking would have been a great way to get this going. The one place that did have some intelligent conversation, but I only got involved in that very late, was the European Molecular Biology Lab. They had Friday afternoon Zoom conferences, but even these were very limited in extent. I think that, you know, maybe because we couldn't meet, we didn't have the chance to discuss. But I honestly think that we still, you know, committees are very diverse people who are well-intentioned, are such smart devices, and they really, really can solve problems. I think we would together plan how to approach the public. One final thing, the one good thing for me that came out of all of this was that, much to my own surprise, I discovered Twitter. And Twitter has much more intelligent conversation than the National Academy of Science, the Royal Society, Lindau, or the Nobel Foundation. And I actually said this in an early tweet. The criticism is wonderful, because good science, you have to be able to stand up to criticism. Scientists expect to be torn apart. And we, as you said, we circled the wagons against this, and it really, really hurt us.
So I mean, that is a very important point, that scientists are very fond of saying, when they're speaking individually, that scientists aren't out to prove anything. They don't have a theory they're trying to prove. What they're doing is looking at the evidence. They're weighing the evidence. They're changing their minds all the time. This is what makes science different from other things. And that's the story around science. And that's what we're asking people to believe in when we're trying to build public trust. But what you're saying really is that that's not at all how it's being operating now. And that's very worrying if what we're trying to do is convince the public that they are that we are honest about what we're telling them. This is undermining the whole case for science, it would seem to me. Kalino wants to reply to you, so let's have the two of them on screen for a while. And please, Michael.
So quickly to reply to Peter, I also want to say something to Alice. I'm not saying that corona is like flu. It has exactly the same excess death and age ranges as flu, and flu is a very serious disease. So I'm not undermining COVID. I also agree that there's been really, really good work on the biochemistry and the medical science of this. There's also been amazing developments in the actual treatment. So doctors now probably would save twice as many people who are ill by using ventilators properly, by doing blood tests. As regards to Alice, I think that I'm not only concerned about gender inequality, I totally agree with you, but something else that is actually perhaps even more surprising, and that is there's been a lot of age discrimination. And basically, if you look at NIH funding records, you discover that over the last 20 years, as the average age of reviewers has got older, because the average age of scientists have got older, the chances of getting a grant have dropped by age. So in some ways, 40 became the new 20, but 40-year-olds are not 20-year-olds. And this is something which I wrote a paper about. I was shocked to see. This again, in Corona, we also have this generation gap. The people who are generally dying are the older people. The age mortality of people under 65 is exactly 8%. Over 85 is 50%. Those are exactly the same numbers that we see for flu. I did want to say something about risk going back further, and the Winston Center. In the middle of March, Sir David Spiegelhalter wrote a very nice Medium review equating the risk of corona with the natural risk of dying. And basically he concluded that the risk of corona, using numbers that were coming out of Imperial College, was about 1 year's worth of death. I immediately wrote back and said he was wrong. My analysis suggested that it was not 1 year's worth of death, but 1 month worth of death. I then tried to communicate this to Neil Ferguson. He ignored my emails. I got in touch with the head of the Royal Society, eventually got them to read the emails, and in the end they said, no, I was wrong, it is 1 year. The fact is, 2 months later, the excess burden of death of corona is about 3 weeks of natural death. So the fact is, as these scientists shut things down, the problem is not just with lack of communication with the public. Scientists are arrogant and refuse to listen to people not in their fields. It's a bit like a CEO of a company. Scientists are getting away scot-free for causing billions of dollars worth of damage. And this is something which cannot be allowed to happen. It's not just the World Health Organization. Ferguson wanted Sweden to lock down, got Britain to lock down, and when the numbers become normal, exactly what you would have expected without lockdown, he then says, it's because of lockdown. This is terrible science. This is science which should go on trial. Scientists cannot cause damage like this and refuse to listen. I really tried hard to get them at least to discuss this with me. In the end, I said something I never say, whatever, just leave me alone, go ahead and die. And the fact is that epidemiology and modeling has been a disgrace. They have not looked at the data. They have been wrong at every turn. We're going to see that although coronavirus is a different disease, the net impact of death is going to be very similar to severe flu. And it's going to be that way without lockdown. As regards one final thing, I think a policy like Australia may seem very smart until you get second breaks and third breaks. Sweden is the only country that has done the right thing. They're heading for what they consider herd immunity. It occurs at 15%, not at 80%. Another error that the epidemiologists made. Sweden is going to end up with about 600 deaths per million.
Flora, we have you online, so please go ahead with your question.
Hello, yeah. I'm a physics student from Germany, and I just came back from Erasmus in Sweden at Lund University. And I noticed that there's a completely different view of how Sweden is handling the corona crisis in the rest of the world. And everybody is just against what Sweden is doing, even though when we take a look at Germany now, we can see that during the reopening of the country, there are many new hotspots arising. And I am wondering why countries are still hating against Sweden and encouraging Sweden to go into lockdown, even though we can now see that after going out of lockdown, there are many new problems which Sweden simply won't have because they never had the complete lockdown.
So, Michael, very briefly, yes, and this ties in with several questions who have been questioners who've been writing in saying they're interested in your take on lockdowns generally, Michael. So, very briefly.
It's very simple. I think all countries who locked down are against Sweden because Sweden shows that they locked down for no reason whatsoever. Sweden has a lower death rate than New York, London, England. Many parts of Italy, lockdown was unnecessary. Sweden showed this, and as a result, having made the mistake, no politician is going to they call dollar error to the world. So that's the problem. Sweden is doing the right thing. If you look at the numbers, they're actually being very clever in trying to saturate their epidemic. They're moving it from Stockholm to Skåne to Göteborg, and they really are being very, very smart. Germany is now in trouble. They locked down too hard. England's going to be fine. Northern Italy is fine. France and Belgium are fine. But I think that Sweden will be proven in retrospect to have been the only country in the world, perhaps with the exception of Switzerland, that did the right thing.
Do any of you others wish to say anything different from that? No? Sounds like you've managed to convince your panel, Michael.
Thank you very much.